If you've ever dealt with someone who left you confused, drained, or questioning your own reality, but you couldn't quite explain why, then by the end of this video, you're going to see the entire pattern with absolute clarity. Because female narcissism doesn't look like what most of us imagine. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not the obvious self-obsessed stereotype. In fact, that's exactly why it slips under the radar. In this breakdown, you'll learn the 13 subtle signs psychologists look for, the patterns that reveal themselves only when you know what to listen for. You'll hear about the attention-seeking behaviors, the empathy gaps, the covert manipulation, the unpredictable switching, and the emotional ripple effects that can quietly reshape your confidence and your boundaries if you don't recognize them early. And here's why watching until the end matters. A female narcissist often looks like the safest, sweetest, most caring person in the room. The good one, the helper, the giver. But once your emotions get involved, the mask can shift. And if you miss the early tells, you may find yourself stuck in a dynamic that slowly erodes your sense of self without you realizing what's happening. This video gives you the clarity you need to protect your emotional space, set boundaries that actually hold, and stop personalizing behavior that was never about you in the first place. Female narcissism is one of those things most people think they'd recognize instantly. Cold heart, big ego, obvious arrogance. But the truth is much quieter, much softer around the edges. A woman with high narcissistic traits can look incredibly warm on the surface. Maternal, helpful, even self-sacrificing, and that's exactly why so many people miss the early signs. You don't really see the pattern until the relationship starts to deepen and your feelings enter the equation. That's when the mask shifts. That's when the tiny tells begin slipping through the cracks. The first sign is the constant need for attention, validation, or approval. And this isn't the cliché "look at me" kind of craving. It can shape-shift. Sometimes it's the woman who needs social media praise like oxygen, chasing likes the way others chase coffee. Other times it's the martyr complex, the woman who does everything for everyone, always exhausted, always sacrificing, always subtly reminding the world of just how much she gives. It looks generous, but the emotional engine underneath it is totally different. She's not giving to help, she's giving to feel worthy. Sign number 2 is the lack of empathy, not the dramatic kind, just a subtle inability to register the emotional weight of her actions. She can understand moral right and wrong logically, but the invisible nuances, your tone, your feelings, the emotional ripple effects, she simply doesn't pick up on. When you tell her something she said hurt you, she often seems confused, not cruel. And depending on where she sits on the spectrum, she'll either get defensive or she'll try to care but still miss the mark. It's like watching someone with no musical ear try to tune a violin. They're trying, but the strings never land quite right. Sign number 3 is manipulative behavior, though not always consciously. These are survival tactics learned in childhood: guilt-tripping, gaslighting, triangulating, anything to avoid direct conflict. Instead of addressing issues head-on, she manages people. She shapes narratives. She influences how others see one another. Direct communication feels unsafe because, in her early world, honesty didn't get her needs met, manipulation did, so she keeps using the tools she learned young, even in adulthood. Sign number 4 is the grandiose sense of self, a quiet superiority masking a deeply fragile identity. On the outside, she's confident, opinionated, certain. Her views are right, her interpretation is the correct one. But behind that polished exterior is someone who never developed a stable sense of self because expressing her authentic feelings was punished or ignored growing up. So she builds an identity out of certainty, out of superiority, out of "I know best," not because she truly believes it, but because the alternative, feeling unworthy, is intolerable. These early signs, attention-seeking, empathy gaps, manipulation, and fragile grandiosity, blend together in ways that make female narcissism incredibly hard to spot at first. The behavior hides behind warmth, helpfulness, charm, and even selflessness. But once you see the pattern, it becomes unmistakable. And the next signs take that clarity even deeper. Before we move on, drop the words "clear signs" in the comments if these first 4 traits helped something click for you. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to join a growing community of people who value emotional clarity, strong boundaries, and real psychological insight. Another sign that becomes obvious once you really watch her behavior is how naturally she slips into an exploitative dynamic. Not in a cartoonishly evil way, she isn't twirling a villain's mustache while plotting, but in a very calculated, self-preserving way. Sign number 5 is that she uses people for her own benefit. She'll gravitate toward relationships that elevate her status, make her life easier, or open doors she can't access on her own. If someone can offer her connections, visibility, admiration, or opportunity, she will be warm, charming, and incredibly attentive. But if someone can't help her, that person becomes almost invisible. Not disliked, just irrelevant. And you'll often see a sharp contrast, overly sweet and enthusiastic with the right people, strangely cold or dismissive with everyone else. This selective warmth is one of the clearest giveaways that her kindness isn't character, it's strategy. Sign number 6 is the shallow nature of her relationships. This doesn't mean she doesn't spend time with people. In fact, she may spend a lot of time with certain individuals. But intimacy and time are not the same thing. A narcissistic woman is terrified of being fully seen because the inside, the shame, the insecurity, the fractured identity, feels too dangerous to expose. So she keeps connections surface level even when they appear close. She may create codependent bonds where she and the other person become almost fused, but the emotional sharing is still limited. You might spend hours with her, talk every day, travel together, even share a home, and yet still have no real access to her inner world. It's proximity without depth, emotional closeness on mute. Sign number 7 is the inconsistent, unpredictable switching behavior often called splitting. One moment she sees you as perfect, loyal, special, irreplaceable. The next moment, after one minor misstep, you find yourself dropped into the bad box. She can flip from overly affectionate to strangely cold without any logical bridge between the two states. You might be treated like her favorite person all week, then suddenly ignored or criticized over something trivial. It's not about you. It's about her emotional instability, her internal fragmentation. She doesn't see people in shades of gray, just all good or all bad, and you're constantly shifting categories based on how secure or threatened she feels in that moment. This back and forth can create a roller coaster effect that leaves you confused, anxious, or walking on eggshells without even realizing it. Sign number 8 is her extreme sensitivity to criticism. Offering constructive feedback to a woman with high narcissistic traits is like stepping on a landmine. Even a gentle comment can trigger an explosion. She doesn't interpret feedback as something I did could be better, but rather, I am bad. The shame hits instantly and deeply, so she responds with defensiveness, denial, excuses, or hostility, anything to protect her ego. And because her internal sense of self is so fragile, she will need constant external validation, what psychologists call narcissistic supply, just to feel stable. People who admire her, praise her, or put her on a pedestal become essential. Anyone who challenges her narrative becomes a threat. This ego protection mode runs silently in the background of almost everything she does. It shapes her communication, her reactions, her relationships, and even her self-image. To her, every interaction is either a boost to her fragile identity or a threat to it. That's why criticism from you, even delivered with love, can feel like an attack she must immediately defend against. Not because she hates you, but because shame overwhelms her before logic even enters the room. When you look at these 4 signs together, exploitation, shallow intimacy, splitting, and hypersensitivity to feedback, you start to see why relationships with female narcissists feel like a constantly shifting landscape. You can never quite predict the emotional weather. One day, warmth, the next a storm that makes no sense. And if you're not careful, you begin adjusting to the chaos instead of recognizing it for what it is. Before we go on, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever seen this kind of emotional switching in someone before? Or if you just want something simple, type, I see it now. It's a quick way to lock in the lesson and helps others feel less alone. Another pattern that becomes painfully clear over time is how a female narcissist handles responsibility. Sign number 9 is the lack of accountability. When something goes wrong, she doesn't pause and reflect. She pivots. instantly. There's always a reason. Someone else's mistake, someone else's misunderstanding, someone else's poor timing. Anything to avoid the uncomfortable moment of acknowledging, I messed up. A simple apology without excuses is almost impossible because taking ownership feels like self-annihilation. To you, it might just be a small slip. To her, it feels like confirmation of the deep shame she works so hard to avoid. So she rewrites the story in real time, ensuring she's never the one at fault. Sign number 10 is boundary violation. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, though that can happen too, but the subtle, everyday kind that chips away at your emotional safety. She might check your phone, read your messages, demand access to parts of your life she doesn't offer back. And if you confront her, she'll minimize it. It's not a big deal. I was just worried, or you're overreacting. Because if she doesn't feel the boundary herself, then to her, it doesn't exist. She logically knows certain behaviors are wrong, but she doesn't internalize why they're harmful. Her decisions center around her own goals, her own fears, her own needs, and everything else becomes negotiable. But even though she rationalizes these behaviors as harmless, they often create chaos, conflict, and emotional fallout she didn't anticipate. And when that happens, it loops back to sign 9. It's someone else's fault. Sign number 11 is isolation, sometimes extreme, sometimes subtle. If you're close to her, she might quietly steer you away from other people, not always by force, but through emotional nudges. A jealous comment here, a casual insult about your friend there, a suggestion that someone doesn't really care about you. Over time, you find yourself spending more time with her and less with everyone else. That's the intention. She wants you emotionally available to her and only her. In more toxic or abusive cases, she may escalate this behavior, actively sabotaging relationships or creating false narratives that push others out of your life. But even in softer forms, isolation protects her supply. It ensures you remain close, dependable, and devoted, without outside influences challenging her control. Sign number 12 is the constant put-downs. To maintain her own fragile sense of superiority, she has to keep you slightly beneath her. Not always dramatically, sometimes it's subtle. Little comments about your appearance, your decisions, your career, your intelligence. Tiny digs disguised as jokes or helpful feedback. These micro-critiques add up, especially when they come from someone you care about. And if she's more overt, the insults can escalate into full-blown criticism or verbal attacks. Either way, the goal is the same: elevate herself by lowering you. If she feels insecure, she'll highlight your flaws. If she feels threatened, she'll compare you to someone better. If she feels inadequate, she'll scan for anything that makes you look worse. It's emotional erosion in slow motion. What makes this especially damaging is how normalized it becomes. You start absorbing her evaluation of you as if it's objective truth. You question your abilities. You doubt your instincts. You adjust your behavior to avoid triggering her, and slowly, you shrink. That's the psychological toll of being around someone who constantly chips away at your self-esteem, subtly or aggressively. These 4 signs: lack of accountability, boundary violations, isolation tactics, and chronic put-downs, create a relationship dynamic where you're always trying to stay on her good side, always trying to be enough, always trying not to upset the delicate emotional ecosystem she's built around herself. It's exhausting, and by the time you notice how much it's affecting you, the pattern has usually already taken root. Before we move to the final part, I'd love to hear your take. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's small comments slowly made you question yourself? If you want something simpler, just drop the words "I matter" in the comments to anchor this part's lesson. The last sign, number 13, is the unpredictable mood swings. This is where everything you've seen so far, the fragility, the shame, the defensiveness, the lack of emotional regulation, finally shows its full impact. A female narcissist can shift moods with almost no warning. Something tiny, something you barely register, can send her into irritation, anger, withdrawal, or outright hostility. It's not logical, it's not proportional, it's not something you can reason with. Her emotions move fast and hit hard because she doesn't have the internal stability to process them. So the storm comes suddenly, and whoever is closest to her ends up absorbing the fallout, not because they did anything wrong, but because they were simply there when the wave hit, and this unpredictability doesn't stay contained inside her. it spills into your life. When you're around someone who switches moods without clear triggers, you start bracing yourself. You get used to monitoring their tone, their facial expressions, their silence. You learn to anticipate their reactions, even when nothing is actually happening. Over time, this hypervigilance becomes your new normal. It wears down your emotional energy and makes you second-guess your own feelings. That's the long-term impact. Your nervous system gets conditioned to expect instability, even when you're not with her. If distancing yourself is an option, it's often the healthiest choice. But life isn't always that simple. Sometimes the narcissist is a family member, a partner, a colleague, or someone you can't easily detach from. In those cases, the priority becomes boundaries. Clear, consistent, non-negotiable boundaries that protect your mental and emotional well-being. That means limiting what you share, limiting how much power you give their reactions, and refusing to absorb responsibility for their mood swings. You're not the regulator for their emotions, even if they expect you to be. It's also important to keep some nuance here. Not everyone with high narcissistic traits meets the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. That's actually rare. Narcissism is a spectrum. Some people land on the mild end. They struggle with empathy, they react defensively, they need a lot of validation, but they're not malicious. Others fall in the extreme range, highly unpredictable, deeply manipulative, and emotionally destructive. Labeling every difficult person a narcissist isn't helpful, and it often shuts down important conversations. A more accurate, less stigmatizing way to describe these individuals is simply someone who struggles to see other people's perspectives, someone who never learned how to regulate their emotions, someone who still carries deep wounds that now spill into their adult relationships. Recognizing these traits isn't about diagnosing people. It's about understanding patterns so you can protect yourself. When you can see the dynamic clearly, you can step out of survival mode. You can stop personalizing their behavior. You can stop bending yourself into uncomfortable shapes just to avoid triggering them. You can stand in your own emotional space without shrinking to fit theirs. Whether this person is in your life right now or shows up in your past, the takeaway is the same. Your worth is not determined by someone else's instability. Their inability to empathize doesn't make your feelings invalid. Their lack of accountability doesn't make you responsible. Their mood swings don't make you the cause. The clearer you get about these patterns, the less power they have over you. If anything in this final section resonated, I'd love to hear it. Share your experience or simply comment "I choose peace" to anchor the lesson and help others feel supported in the conversation. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing to join a growing community of people who value emotional clarity, healthy boundaries, and real psychological insight.